Behold, the first black Macintosh computer, or as I like to call it, the Blackintosh. Hey guys, how are you all doing? If you're new here, welcome. My name is Krazy Ken, and welcome to Macintosh, the tech month dedicated to retro Apple Macintosh hardware and software. And for my contribution today, we're going to be diving into a rare Macintosh computer that only sold about 10,000 units, the Macintosh TV. So what's so special about this computer? Why did it become rare? Why did it fail? Well, we'll talk about all that stuff and more today. So Apple really isn't a stranger to the television world. They've done plenty of things with it in regards to products and services such as Apple TV Plus, the iTunes Store, and the Apple TV hardware itself. But all of that stuff was from the 2000s. Apple was actually tinkering with television ideas as far back as the 90s, maybe even earlier, I'm not even sure. But I can tell you for sure, the Apple Interactive Television Box was being developed, but that never made it to retail, and we'll cover that rare thing in a future episode. But for today, we'll focus on this guy, which actually did make it to retail. So now, let's dive into the Mac TV's history. In the fall of 1991, Apple wasn't planning to keep the all-in-one form factor alive. Thankfully, Larry Barbera spoke up and investigated ways to create a 10th anniversary Macintosh. That's right, not a 20th anniversary Macintosh, a 10th anniversary Macintosh. This resulted in the Mondo project, which featured a new all-in-one design inspired by Frog Design's Big Mac concept. Ultimately, much of the industrial design group at Apple didn't like it, and the project was shelved. But then, in the fall of 1992, Apple's CEO John Sculley examined the Macintosh Color Classic, a product that Apple was about to release. "The screen's too small," he said. "Make it 14 inches. Oh, and give it a CD-ROM drive, stereo speakers, and hey, can you have it done in 6 months? Thanks." Yes, enter Eric Xanthopoulos, a product design manager at Apple. Eric thought, where can we get a computer like that? So he picked up the Mondo project and moved it into development. This resulted in a tweet case design which debuted with the Macintosh LC520, codenamed Hook, in July 1993, and it was a hit. Now some of you may be thinking, we paid to hear you talk about the Macintosh TV. What's going on? Well, first of all, no, you didn't pay me to talk about it unless you want to support my Patreon. And second, this computer is based on the LC520's new case, so I think it was necessary to cover that brief history. Just take a 520, paint it black, put an infrared sensor up here, shove a tuner inside, cripple the performance, wait what, and Bob's your uncle. So the Macintosh TV went on sale in October 1993 for $2,079 US, and it was primarily marketed toward first-time Mac buyers and college students who just wanted the best of both worlds combined into a hybrid computer. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Let's slow down a little bit and observe the design and the features. And frankly, I don't even care what kind of functionality this thing has. I just like that it's black. Seriously, my favorite part of this design is the black color. And this was the first Mac desktop to actually be in black. And throughout Apple's history, only a handful of Mac desktops were sold in black/space gray. So this is a rare occurrence. But there's one design feature that kind of sticks out, and you could probably already tell. The whole computer is beautiful and black, except for the CD drive. Why isn't the CD drive black, but everything else is black? Well, apparently there's a story behind it, and my source is a guy who knows a guy who used to work at Apple, so take this with a grain of salt. Apparently, certain people that were working on this computer didn't think it was going to sell very well. And because they already had this part for the CD drive in that color, they thought, okay, we'll just use that, because if they have to make a black one, that's just going to increase cost. So they kept it that way, and that was it. They ignored it. You can tell Steve Jobs wasn't at the company at that time. He would have whooped someone's ass. Color choices aside, the design is very curvy, which follows the espresso design language that Apple was pushing at the time. And for easy access to the motherboard and the hard disk, you could pop off the back panel. Sometimes there's screws in there, go ahead and take those out. And then you pull on these tabs and the panel pops off. Now let's talk about that display. It's a 14-inch Sony Trinitron running at 640 by 480 resolution with 8-bit color for the computer graphics and 16-bit color for the TV. This Mac also features a built-in microphone, stereo speakers, a 2x CD-ROM drive, and a 1.44 megabyte floppy drive. But the biggest feature, of course, is the built-in TV functionality. This was the first Mac with a TV tuner, and it was also the first Mac to ship with a remote, which is a feature that reoccurred in future Apple products. Even all the way down into the Intel era with Steve Jobs, certain Macs sold with a remote so you could use the front row feature. The TV tuner was pre-installed on the logic board, and an F-type coax connector was accessible on the back so you could screw in your antenna or whichever device you used for your TV signal. And this Mac also featured RCA jacks so you could plug in a VCR, game consoles, etc. Now, this Mac didn't have a ton of horsepower, which we'll talk more about later, so it couldn't do TV and computer stuff at the same time. You could either view one or the other. And the way you would do that is you would press a keyboard shortcut, you can assign your own keyboard shortcut, and it would fade out to the TV mode and then fade back into the desktop. However, even though you couldn't see the TV mode while in the Macintosh environment, you could at least still hear it, so there's that. You can also use the remote to switch between the TV and desktop. Heck, even my modern Sony remote still works with this Mac TV perfectly. And as a little bonus feature, you can press Shift-Command-3 while in TV mode and a screenshot of the video will save to your hard disk. So this thing sounds pretty cool, right? What's the problem? We're going to review the specs quickly, and then the limitations will become more apparent. Let's have a look. The Macintosh TV used a Motorola 68030 processor clocked at 32 MHz. It shipped with a 160 MB hard disk and 5 MB of RAM. 4 MB built into the motherboard, plus 1 MB in the 72-pin SIM slot. Now you could upgrade the RAM if you want, but this computer could only handle 8 MB maximum. So in effect, with the 4 built into the board, you could only install a 4 MB stick into the SIM slot. For the I/O, we have 2 Apple Desktop Bus ports, 2 serial ports, 1 DB25 SCSI port, a headphone jack on the front, and again, the F-type connector and the RCA jacks. This Mac shipped with System 7.1, but it could be upgraded to macOS 7.6.1 if you'd like. The specs maybe weren't that great for most people, especially at the time for an over $2,000 computer. So let's dive into a little more detail. The first big problem is the 68030. Remember how this Mac could only display the TV or the desktop at one time? You couldn't use both simultaneously, and that was primarily due to the 68030's restrictions. If this Mac were equipped with an 040, this feature would be a lot more possible to implement. In addition, despite the processor running at 32 MHz, the system bus was only clocked at 16. So the processor was fast, but because of that slow system bus, the data flowing between the components was overall much slower, which brings everything down. So on paper, even though this 32 MHz computer may look faster than a 25 MHz Mac, in practice, it was actually slower. Another shortcoming is the RAM limit. This Mac could only address 8 MB. For perspective, the Macintosh Classic 2, which was released 2 years earlier, has a 10 MB limit. Another limitation was the lack of an expansion slot. Many other Macs at the time have at least one processor direct slot, or PDS. But here's something you could do. Remember how the logic board just slides out? Well, the good news is you can use a Mystic board upgrade. The board is the same size, it'll slide right in, and you can get a 68040 processor and a much higher RAM limit, so you can get more functionality and speed out of a Mystic board upgrade. But for your average consumer, especially back then, this was not a practical option. It's also worth noting there's no recording functionality, and according to some other old reviews I read, playback wasn't always the smoothest through the coax connection. I can't test that myself with my current equipment, so I'm taking that with a grain of salt, but just keep that in mind. Now, if I'm a college student and I see this marketed toward me, I might go, wow, this is awesome, it's 2-in-1. I can save space in my dorm, I don't have to carry as much with me when I move around. On the surface, it looks great. But when you dive into it a little bit more, it just kind of seems like the Macintosh TV is a jack of all trades, but master of none. And that's likely a big reason why it failed and only sold about 10,000 units. But there's always a silver lining. It wasn't a 100% fail. In fact, the TV tuner option was available in future Mac models, and that all started with this computer. And the remote was killed off eventually, but the remote was still a feature that came with the Macs, and you could use it for front row. That aside, it was still a pretty big flop, but because of its limited supply, unique features, and a really awesome black color, it's really turned into a cool collector's item now. So let me know what you think about the Macintosh TV, and feel free to subscribe for more tech episodes coming all the time from the Computer Clan. And feel free to share this episode on social media with hashtag Marcintosh. And more importantly, feel free to share your own RetroMac stuff with that hashtag as well. And if you'd like to help fund the future of the Computer Clan, plus get some awesome perks along the way, feel free to pledge to my Patreon. Thanks in advance for your support. And hey, if you like this episode, you know what to do. Thanks for sticking with me, catch the Krazy, and pass it on.